Thank you. Hi everybody, my name's Gary, I'm an addict.
Gary.
Please be gentle with me this morning. I'm coming down with something, so I feel a little bit shaky and a bit fragile, and but I'm glad to be here. Thanks for asking me to come and speak. I initially thought I couldn't do it, and then it turned out my son went on a sleepover at one of his mates, so here I am. I'd usually be spending my Sunday morning kicking a football around with him probably, but so I'm glad to be here. Try and get this into 20 minutes. I feel like I should, I hear sometimes in NA people say, I don't want to talk about my using, and it's like, sometimes I think it's important to talk about that a little bit just to qualify myself, because there might be people in the room who've never heard me before, and if I just start, crashing into talking about spiritual principles and the 12 steps of recovery, it can kind of that language can alienate people who don't necessarily know that I come from a similar place to what they come from. And when I say a similar place to what they come from, I come from near Blackburn. I'm not talking about geographics here. I'm talking about a similar place emotionally and spiritually, and as I say, I'm Gary, I'm an addict, and I said those words in my very first NA meeting, and I had no idea what I was saying. I knew a hell of a lot about drugs, but I knew absolutely nothing about addiction, and I've learned about addiction by coming here. A lot of what I talk about, I talk about in hindsight. A lot of what I talk about I didn't know when I first got here. Life is lived forwards, but it's understood backwards, and as I say, I was an addict. I had no idea what was wrong with me when I was out there using. I had no idea why I was repeatedly going into situations with people I didn't want to be amongst, doing things I didn't want to do, and completely unable to stop myself from doing that. And the cumulative effect of doing things that you don't want to do against your conscience, against my conscience, the cumulative effect of that was I just absolutely despised myself by the time I hit rock bottom. The basic text talks about, and I talk about the basic text when I'm in NA meetings. I'm a bitextual. I don't just read the literature of Narcotics Anonymous, and I love the intro at the beginning of this meeting. I've been attacked over the years for attending other 12-step fellowships, but people who do that shit, just stay away from me, because it's there's nothing spiritual about it. If you want to know the best way to work the 12 steps, which book to use, do it whichever way your sponsor does it. That's what I'll tell you. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to advocate anything to anybody. I've only got my own experience, but I the basic text talks about, we know the two things that make up true addiction: obsession and compulsion. Obsession, one thought that overrides all other thinking. That was how my mind worked in my active drug addiction. As soon as I opened my eyes, my first waking thought was to get and use and find ways and means to get more. It wasn't like that when I first started using. When I first started using, it was something that I kind of did for a bit of approval, to be one of the lads. It's what all the older guys did, who I looked up to. You had to have the right clobber, you had to walk the right way, talk the right way, and drugs was part and parcel of the lifestyle that I grew up amongst. But what happened in my drug addiction was at some point I crossed an invisible line, and it became about something altogether different. It wasn't about fitting in. It was about using out of necessity. I was obsessed. And I had a compulsion. I was compelled to do this. I was compelled to use. It was a physical urge beyond my mental control. The only time it seemed like a good idea to get clean was whilst I was stoned. As soon as I woke up the next morning, the obsession was on me and the cravings were on me, and I was compelled to do it, and I couldn't stop myself from doing it. And I hated myself for doing it, and because I'm not one of those addicts who says, when I was out there using, I had no conscience. My problem was when I was out there using, I had too much conscience. And it was my conscience, ultimately, I believe, that brought me into recovery. I just could not live with myself doing what I was doing. People say, if I pick up again, it'll kill me. You might be fortunate if it does, because it wasn't the idea that drugs were going to kill me that brought me to Narcotics Anonymous. I was more afraid that they weren't going to kill me. And I was going to be stuck in that lifestyle that I was living day in, day out for a few more decades. And no one could tell me anything. and people tried, and girlfriends and family members, and you know, people would say, you need to slow down with that stuff. Yeah, whatever. I'm all right. I know what I'm doing. You know, older guys have been using a lot longer than me. If you carry on with that stuff, using the way you're going at it, it's going to kill you. Yeah. Get off my case. Stop driving me mad. I know what I'm doing. I'm all right. No one could tell me anything. And you know what? If I'm not careful and I don't do some of the stuff that we do around here, I can get like that clean. What? I ain't been to a meeting for 3 months. I feel all right. What are you fucking driving me mad for? Do you know what I mean? And what happened to me was, you know, the worst thing about the cravings were, no matter how much of it I got, it was never quite enough. It was never quite hit the spot. So the only time I was satisfied was when I was unconscious. I would drink to black out. I would use until I was unconscious. And if I was conscious, I wasn't quite stoned enough. And you know, so I didn't make a very good drug dealer. You know, and you know, and I've told this story 100 times. You know, I would go and get myself a 16th. I'd get me McDonald's spoons. I'd put my personal over here. I'd get my wraps together. I put my wraps out, and I think to myself, you know, I'm going to make top wraps because I've got that part of the addict personality where I want everyone to like me. So I'm going to put top wraps out, and then everyone's going to say he's got top bags, that kid. You know, and so I put my wraps together. I use my personal, and then I sit back and I think, them bags were a bit big, weren't they? Back in the drawer, out come the wraps, a bit out of every wrap, a bit more personal. I use that, that's gone. And I think, a couple of them wraps I took a little bit too much out of, they're not really saleable now. Back in the drawer again. Before I know it, you know, I've got a couple of poxy £10 wraps and I'm scratching around trying to get a score together to get on my feet the next day. You know, I was no Pablo Escobar. You know, there's no Al Pacino sitting here. Do you know what I mean? No Scarface here. I was, you know, and the dealers thought I was a nuisance, and I got sick of 15-year-old kids on mountain bikes talking to me like I'm a prick because I'm £2 short again. You know, and you know, my clean date's 13th of September 1993. I got clean in Blackpool when there was one NA meeting a week, and it came as a result of hitting bottom. And when I say I hit bottom, hitting bottom was a very, very important thing for me, and understanding hitting bottom has been a very, very important thing for me. Because in the 7th step we talk about humbly asking whatever's up there to remove our shortcomings. When I hit bottom, I humbly asked whatever's up there to remove my drug addiction. I was on my knees, screaming from the pit of my stomach in desperation, help me, I can't do this anymore. I can't go on another day living the way I'm living. And in doing that, through a bizarre series of events within 24 hours, I'm walking into a detox, wearing my dad's duffel coat, 7.5 stone in weight with a shiner, holes in the bottom of my trainers, and they detoxed me and they brought me to my first meeting in Narcotics Anonymous. And what I got from my first meeting in Narcotics Anonymous was it was the first place I felt welcome in a long time. There was one girl there who had over a year clean. She was a local guru in Blackpool. We all thought she had all the answers because she'd done, and I remember pulling her. I knew she was a working girl in Hume. When I lived in Hume in Manchester, she lived in the next block to me, and I knew her from my using. And I remember pulling her to the side and saying, just let me get this straight. You have gone over a year with nothing. With not a drink, not a spliff, nothing. And she was like, yeah, keep coming back. People made me welcome, people told me to keep coming back, and that's what I've done. Now, in keeping coming back, I started to find out about addiction. Because where I was obsessed, one thought that overrides all others when I was out there using, I was obsessed with the getting and using and finding ways and means to get more. My obsession for drugs was swiftly removed and swiftly replaced by my new obsession. An obsession with myself. One thought that overrides all others. I couldn't stop thinking about me constantly. What I look like, what I sound like, what that person thinks of me. These trainers don't look right with these jeans. I need a haircut. I've got bags under my eyes. I've got a spot. I've got a cold sore. I need an haircut. It's just relentless thinking about myself. And if you stick around a little while, which I have done now, that becomes very, very wearing and very, very tiring and makes you very, very unhappy. not only do I have an abnormal reaction to drugs, I have an abnormal reaction to abstinence from them. That's why at just over 23 years clean, I recently had to do a 90-90. Because I'm still humbly asking for that shortcoming to be removed. Now, the first step taught me about, first of all, when I sponsor people, I never start straight away on the first step. Because before you're going to go into a first step, you need to know what you're admitting powerlessness over. So I spend a bit of time with people explaining and trying to break down what addiction comprises of, what I've just done now very briefly. The first step taught me about powerlessness, powerless over my addiction, that my life become unmanageable. Now the thing about the fifth step is it connects very strongly to the first step, because the second part of the first step, I thought that was about the fact that, I used to have kind of, I remember being in a bed sit once and I was only there 6 weeks. It was like the Tasmanian devil had been through the place, do you know what I mean? The door had been kicked off the hinges by some guys who'd come round to try and tax me, and I was serving up. I'd had a few fires in there. I don't know if anyone relates to that, do you know what I mean? The carpet had been burnt a few times, and I'd left there with like this mess behind me and didn't pay the rent on there. That is a form of unmanageability, but the unmanageability that I'll experience clean comes from 3 things: resentment, fear, and the way I conduct myself sexually. So the first step is about me admitting powerlessness and me understanding that in and of myself, my life will become unmanageable. And it will become unmanageable with those 3 things. And if I don't address those 3 things, those 3 things will make my life so unmanageable that the mental condition that I suffer from, that I'm still powerless over after 23 years, in and of myself, will convince me that the thing that used to work for me, that doesn't work for me anymore, i.e. drugs, could maybe work again. So the second step teaches me that I need a power greater than myself that can restore me to some kind of sanity. Well, I got that in my first meeting. I came in here, there's a power greater than myself, you lot, that was staying clean, and I believed, that through that power, through coming to these meetings, through coming back, I could stay clean a day at a time. And I love the fact that the second step and the third step are worded differently. It talks about a power greater than ourselves in the second step. So even if I whatever your concept of a higher power is, whether that's, God, universe, Buddha, Allah, man in the moon, whatever you want to call it, chair leg, as some people flipping talk about. I've never got that one, but whatever that is, I don't really need to know that. And if I question that and I doubt that, and in fact, if I don't believe in that, as long as I believe this power greater than myself in here, with a spiritual principle of honesty, and the shared purpose of recovery from drug addiction, there's a power in here that I can tap into that will keep me clean a day at a time. How comfortable that will be for me, how bumpy a ride that will be for me, is questionable. I can make it a lot less bumpy by trying to bring some spiritual principles into my life. And when I say bring spiritual principles into my life, I'm talking about trying to live in alignment with that conscience that was slaughtering me when I was out there using, and will slaughter me in here clean. And so the third step talks about making a decision. It's making a decision to try and live my life by spiritual principles, rather than living my life by my own self-centered ends. And so the third, I've heard people say, I just worked the first 3 steps. If you've worked the third step, you're on the 4th step. You can't kind of work the third step and then stop. The third step is a decision. It's simply a decision. It's not, it's in order to carry out that decision, I've got to get into a 4th step. So in a 4th step, I start writing down my resentments and finding my part in those resentments. And I start finding that the people I resent, the reason I resent them is because the things they're doing remind me of things that I do. And that's a really, really ugly piece of truth I have to digest about myself. I can't stand those people for doing that, and yet they're doing exactly the stuff that I do, because I can't stand me at the core of me. I feel like a fraud and I feel like a coward. Always kind of have done, and I've always overcompensated to try and cover that up. I spent my teenage years, you know, building a facade, because I grew up on red alert, and I thought I learned to play a game. I built a facade for myself, and I hid, that insecure kid hid behind that facade. Didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I can see it now. Got you. You know, and so the fifth step is, you know, when you know, the 4 steps about writing down the resentments, finding important in those, writing down the fears, and looking at my sex conduct, so that I can shape some sort of idea of how I want to conduct myself in that area going forward, what my ideal is. Whether I meet that ideal is another matter altogether, but I can try and shape my ideal for that in the 5th step. You know, and in the 5th step, talks about, you know, we admitted to God, ourselves, and other human beings. So when I do fit, you know, and I've had 6 different sponsors in the time being clean. My first sponsor was using, all the time he was sponsoring me, but he still counts because I stay clean. You know, and all of them have tackled this in a different way. What I tend to do nowadays is I'll always light a candle to signify that there's something greater in the room with us. And you know, it's like 2 heads are better than 1. And you know, and the 5th step, it's a 2-way thing. I could share my experience about my own 5th steps. I mean, my first 5th step, I didn't know what I was doing with the step 4. This guy gave me this step 4, I swear it was like this questionnaire he gave me. This was, you know, I got clean before the green and gold, in case, you know, like anybody's kind of hung up on that's how it's got to be done. Right? And I got clean before that. And this guy gave me this kind of questionnaire, and it was like, asked the most ugly, probing questions, you know, and I'm writing it all down. I mean, it ended up like a phone directory, my first 4th step. I rang this guy up, I was stuck on one of the questions through my sexual behaviour. I ring the guy up, I said, I'm really struggling with this one, you know, it's asking me questions. I said, what did you do? He said, I've never done it myself, I just thought it'd be good for you to do it. I'm like in my bed sit, like inside out with emotional turmoil writing this thing, do you know what I mean? But it wasn't concise. It didn't get to the exact nature. You know, when I did the 5th step for it, I had like about 80 pages. I had some guy from AA sat there, but I was there about 7 hours. By the time that I finished it, the guy looked like he needed a drink. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, so the 5th step should be quite concise. I've got a short attention span. I think sometimes in NA we think that by expanding things, we're improving things. For me, I've got a very short attention span. And, you know, and when I listen to 5th steps, I always tell people, you know, 2.5 to 3 hours is as good as you're going to get out of me. You know, once it gets 2.5 to 3 hours, I start to wander. I start to sort of think about other places I'd rather be, you know, but the truth. But, you know, for that 2.5 hours, I'm there with them. I'm in the trenches and I'm with them. And I know my limitations, and so that's what I do. And, you know, I've probably heard, God knows, I've probably heard 60, 70 5th steps in the time of being clean, you know. And you know, and sometimes you hear other people's and you start to feel better about your own, do you know what I mean? It's like, and I've heard other 5th steps where people have shared stuff with me, and I think, I'd rather you hadn't told me that. I'd rather I actually wasn't privy to that information. Because if you go out there and start kind of using crack again and go into some paranoid psychosis, I'm in the swindle now, do you know what I mean? And you know, and I speak in all seriousness when I'm saying that. You know, I've had it. I tell people when I sponsor them, I say, you use, all bets are off. I'm not your sponsor anymore. The second you pick it up, I'm not your sponsor anymore. Now, some people, some of the codependents in the room might think that's a bit harsh. But I'm not, you know, I've had experience of people ringing me up on a Sunday afternoon, you know, from the crack house, saying, you know, I've been out here using and you haven't rung once to see how I am. Like, I'm going to do that on a Sunday afternoon when I'm playing football with my son. Do you know what I mean? Like, just ringing to check how you're doing over there in the crack house. It's not going to happen, do you know what I mean? So I tell people, if you do what I'm asking you to do, there's a strong possibility, like me, you'll stay clean. And, you know, but the thing about staying clean is I have to stay authentic and keep asking for help. And my ego has been trying to rebuild itself since the day I got here. And it's still trying to rebuild itself now. it uses my material success to separate me, you know, because what my ego wants to do is make me either superior or inferior to you lot. And if it can differentiate me from you lot, then you lot can't help me. And the crux of how this whole thing works is identification. So it'll use my material success, it'll use my career to differentiate me, it'll use my clean time to differentiate me. You know, I'll sit in a meeting like, yeah, what do this lot know? I've been clean 10 years longer than any of them. That's the kind of shit it will come up with. Apologies for the language. You know, it'll use something as spiritual as the principles of the programme as a way of separating me. You know, I've got the real recovery. I've got good recovery. I'm not like them sickos over there, you know. Like. And so what I have to do is I have to keep coming back here and I have to keep being authentic. And I need to do a 5th step very, very soon. I need to write another 4th step and do another 5th step soon. I've just come through probably the toughest year in my recovery. I've been through a divorce. It just got finalised very recently. I'm extremely bitter about it. Although I'm a little bit better than I was. 1990 kind of helped, although that's a slight lie. I did 81 and then I had to go away on business. But I'm in the groove. I'm in the groove. You know, I've done 5 meetings this week. I'm getting to as many meetings as I possibly can. And what it's done, it hasn't changed my situation, but it's changed my perspective of the situation. And that's what this is all about. It's about the perspective. You know, and I've got massive, I had massive amounts of fear about how I'm going to pay the divorce settlement for the next 10 years. It feels incredibly unfair. And perhaps it is. But that's reality. Who said it's going to be fair? You know, and I have to I have to lean heavy on my step 3. You know, my closest friend said it to me. He said, Gary, step 3 is as simple as this. You either believe everything's going to be all right, or you don't. And if you don't, and you start trying to cajole and manipulate and you know, and work people and work situations, you're going to make your life unmanageable and drive yourself nuts. So I'm just putting the best foot forward, coming to as many of these as I can, leaning heavily on Narcotics Anonymous, staying close to the people in Narcotics Anonymous that I trust. You know, Narcotics Anonymous is my home fellowship. I've only ever done service in Narcotics Anonymous. Don't anyone ever dare question my validity as an NA member. This has been a lifeline for me. It really, really has. So, you know, take a hula hoop, I was once told, put it over your head, drop it on the floor. What goes on inside that hula hoop is your business. Everything that goes on outside of that hula hoop is his business. And on that happy note, I'll end this Sunday. Thank you.
Thanks, Ari.